The work that we did was about food culture. We wanted to understand food culture transitions, how food culture has changed over the years, and we focused between 1980 to date. When I say today, that was 2021, because the data that we use actually ends in 2021. But the question is, what is food culture? Culture basically is a way of life. So it is the belief, the customs that influences people's way of life. So food culture is about the traditions, the belief, the customs, the context that influences the food supply, food processing, food handling, and food consumption. So it means that if belief system changes and it changes the food that any group of people eat, then their food culture has effectively changed. So we wanted to look at whether that has happened in Ghana. Has what we used to eat over the years, has it changed or not? But the question is, why does that matter? Up to 74% of non-communicable diseases is related to the food that people eat. So when we talk of non-communicable diseases, we're talking about diseases like cardiovascular diseases like heart attack, hypertension. We're talking about diseases like diabetes. So most of these conditions or disease burdens are related to the food that you eat. So if your food culture changes, it means that it can have implications on the health of the population, where some of these diseases can become pervasive in the community. So it is very important that any community actually understands their food culture and see if it is the good one, see how to maintain it or actually improve it. So we sought to see what has been the trend of Ghana's food culture changes or transitions over the years, in the last 20 years or so. And the objective was to assess these changes and see what has led to these changes, if any, and make policy recommendations to either maintain it or improve it. So that was what we did. The methodology, there are so many ways you can use to assess food culture. You can actually use surveys. You go to people, you ask them questions, you use interviews. You can actually do nutrition analysis, because some food frequency surveys, food nutrition analysis. Most of these are very data intensive. You need a lot of time and a lot of data to do it. But with the time that we had available, we adopted two procedures that we thought were quick and also can be generalized. And one of them is using a database, and the other is using historical information. So for the database, we use what we call the food balance sheet supplied by the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. What the food balance sheet does is that it has data on over 100 food items, different food items, for over 180 countries. So it means that that procedure can be replicated in various countries. It can be comparable. And for every food item, so for example, cassava, it will tell you what has been supplied, and the data will be broken down into different groups. What has been processed into seed, what has been processed into non-food and food items, what has been used as animal feed, and what fraction has been left that can be consumed. So the fraction that has been left that can be consumed, if you divide that by the population of any country, that means that you are able to say how much is available to each person of that country, and that amount is equivalent to what that person would actually consume. That is the assumption, that what is available is equivalent to what is consumed. So we use that data in order to calculate per capita the amount of food of every food item that each person in Ghana can consume. And we're more focused on dietary energy, protein, carbohydrate, fats, and oil. We're more focused on these things in order to inform food security. So having used the FAO database, then we supplemented or coupled that with what we call meta-analysis and systematic review, where we went into published data and saw that food preferences of consumption patterns that has been published in literature from Ghana. What does it also say? Does it confirm what the database, FAO database say, or there are variations? So we did the FAO database analysis of the food balance sheet, and then we also use systematic reviews and meta-analysis. There is a systematic protocol which shows how you are going to extract the data, what data you are going to use, how you are going to analyze it, and how you're going to report it, which is a very elaborate protocol which has been established. So we use that to extract the information from the literature, and then we see what has Ghana been consuming over the years. Has it changed or not? So that was the methodology that we used. What were the key findings that we got? The first one is about dietary energy. Dietary energy is measured, is the amount of calories that every person takes in. That's what we call dietary energy, and it's measured kilocalories per capita per day. So how much calories are you getting per day per person? And we found that, contrary to perceptions, that Ghana's dietary preferences or our eating habits is changing, is becoming more westernized. We are eating more sugary, processed foods, rice, and so on and so forth. That is the perception. But the data that we had from FAO food balance sheet actually indicates that our bulk of dietary energy is being gotten from root and tubers and cereals and rice. So when I say cereals, the rice is also included. But the bulk is actually coming from cassava, yam, plantain, and then maize before rice. So the perception that our food has changed and everybody now is getting his or her energy from rice is not entirely accurate. Rice is there, but the bulk is actually coming from the root and tubers. So that is the first energy, that about 70% of the dietary energy that Ghanaians have now or get now is from root and tubers, including cassava and yam, and then there's maize, and then there's rice. That we found that the dietary energy intake in Ghana is lower than the African average and then the global average. The African, what we found was close to 2,500 kilocalories approximately per capita. But the African average is approximately 2,600 kilocalories per capita, and the global average is approximately 3,000 kilocalories per capita for dietary energy, which means that although we are getting bulk of our dietary energy from root and tubers, we are not actually getting enough equal to the African average or the global average, and we need to do something to improve that. The other aspect that we looked at, we wanted to see whether policies over the years has had a marked influence on the food culture, as agricultural, food and nutrition, health policies that has been churned out since 1990, has it markedly influenced our food culture? Our conclusion is that these policies have actually cushioned the food culture to actually prevent it from changing so much from what we know. But we couldn't see an impactful shift in the trends that we observed due to any policy. We could not ascribe any policy to a change in the trend of the production or consumption. But we are certain that these policies, which are mainly in agriculture production, yield, mainly in health and nutrition, has cushioned the food culture. For example, in the 2008, there was food crisis. We didn't see that dipping in any of the trends that we saw. And we believe that the policies that were having impact on local production of fruit and vegetables and cereals actually had helped, and that is why we didn't see the 2008 food crisis having an impact on our food culture. Fertilizer subsidy program that gives fertilizer subsidies or fertilizers to farmers, and this is not crop specific. So it means that farmers apply the fertilizer to all crops, and maybe that's why we are seeing a constant trend of production increases in all crops and not necessarily a dip in any of them, because these fertilizers are given to farmers and they apply to any crop that they grow. So while we cannot be certain and say that the policy that we have had has markedly changed the trend of the consumption, we can say that it has cushioned our consumption pattern such that it has not deviated from what we know to be the traditional food culture of the Ghanaian. So these are some of the findings that we found. So based on these findings, we felt that there are a number of policy recommendations that we can make. One, we think that the government needs to have collaboration with all stakeholders, including the private stakeholders, and those collaborations can focus on a number of things. First of them is to enhance the value chains of the crops that we have found to be very critical for our food security, like the roots and tubers, cassava, yam. Improve the value chains of them, the oranges, the tomatoes, the ones that we found are critical now for our food culture sustainability. It has to be maintained. But collaboration will also explore opportunities of diversifying. We need to diversify the sources of dietary energy, diversify the vegetables that we take. We need to also diversify the foods that we take. So policies that would diversify our food systems would also be very critical. The other one is we need to also have policies that incentivizes the production of some of these sources of food that can be produced in Ghana. Example is the rice. We can produce rice in Ghana. Rice is becoming so important, and we are importing more than we are producing. So we need to have policies, and this has been said severally, to actually enhance local production of rice. The same way with chicken. Chicken is gaining importance in our meat sources or protein sources, but it is not contributing so much, and it's because majority is imported. There has to be policies that actually promote or incentivizes the local production of this, whilst incrementally restricting the importations of these products. The other policy recommendation we made was for MOFA and all other agencies that are responsible to also have systems in place to look at the enhancement of the productivity of the crops that we found to be very important. The cassavas, the yams, the tomatoes, the oranges. We need to improve their value chains. Sometimes it's not all about the production. Maybe along the value chain, there's something that is going on. We are losing a lot. We heard a lot about post-harvest losses. We need to look at all those areas so that whilst farmers are producing, we can also preserve them along the value chain so that we can meet our food security needs. So in a nutshell, that's the work that we did. The final conclusion was that Ghana's food culture at the moment remains largely traditional. It is in the state of transitioning, but has not yet transitioned. So in the short term, the food culture remains traditional, which is underpinned by the consumption of local staples, cassava, maize, cereals, and pulses. We are getting most of our energy supply from these staples. We are getting most of our protein supply from these staples. So we can say for certain that our food culture has not yet transitioned and become westernized to the processed sugary food yet. It is still underpinned by our traditional food in the short term. But there are signs that in the long term, if policies are not put in place to improve and to maintain the culture, it can change and be westernized.